The night cracked with a roar as flames consumed the prison's wooden gates. Jonathan said, "We cannot wait. They will kill him before dawn." His voice trembled, though his eyes burned with defiance. Soldiers shouted in the distance, their boots hammering against cobblestones. Eleanor clutched her shawl tightly, whispering, "If they see us, we are all dead." Jonathan forced himself forward, his breath ragged, heart pounding like the war drums echoing in the hills. Thomas, the betrayer within, stood just behind him, masking fear with a forced smile. Shadows danced violently across the mud walls as lanterns swayed, painting fear on every face. The stench of smoke and iron filled the air, choking hope itself. Jonathan clenched his fists, murmuring, "Better to die free than live chained." The moment pressed heavy with history, every heartbeat echoing the weight of rebellion yet to be born. The prison yard reeked of blood and smoke as Jonathan crept forward, his breath shallow. Eleanor said, "Every step is death, yet you keep walking." He glanced at her, eyes sharp but heavy with fear. Soldiers patrolled with torches, their shadows stretching like monstrous giants across the ground. Thomas murmured, "Stay close. They will not see us if we move in silence." His tone carried false reassurance, though his eyes flickered with secrets. Jonathan's heart thudded with each stride, louder than the last echo on the stones. Distant cries of prisoners rang from iron cells, pleading for mercy, tearing at his resolve. He whispered, "No chains hold us forever." The air shimmered with heat from burning wood, every moment threatening discovery. Fear clawed at him, yet courage pressed him forward, dragging the weight of destiny with every breath. Inside the cell block, iron doors rattled with desperate hands. Jonathan pressed his palm to the rusted bars, his voice low, "We are here, but silence will save us." Eleanor whispered, "Their eyes, they watch us through the dark." Thomas nodded quickly, urging them to move, though his steps faltered. Prisoners whispered prayers, their voices rising like ghosts against stone walls. Soldiers' footsteps echoed from the corridor, closer, heavier, unrelenting. Jonathan's chest tightened, fear grinding into resolve as the sound of chains dragged across the floor. He whispered fiercely, "Freedom waits beyond fear." The flicker of torchlight crawled over their faces, painting them in dread and determination. History pressed against the walls, demanding courage no one felt ready to give. Jonathan crouched near the cell door, whispering, "The lock is old, it will break." His hands shook as he worked, sweat dripping onto the rusted metal. Eleanor clutched his arm, whispering, "Hurry, the guards are coming." Footsteps thundered closer, boots striking stone. Thomas hissed, "Do not waste time, we will all die here." Jonathan's teeth clenched as the iron creaked, resistance giving way. Prisoners inside pressed against the bars, eyes wide with desperate hope. The sound of keys jingled from the approaching soldiers, steel clashing against leather. Jonathan whispered, "Hold steady, freedom is a heartbeat away." His chest heaved, breath ragged, as the moment stretched thin as wire ready to snap. Shadows lengthened, danger growing with every passing second. The lock snapped with a sharp crack, echoing down the corridor like a gunshot. Jonathan whispered, "It is done." Eleanor gasped, pulling him back as the door swung open. Prisoners cried out, their voices mixing joy and fear. Thomas muttered, "Too loud, they will come for us." Shadows surged as soldiers rounded the far corner, torches blazing. Jonathan's chest tightened, the choice cruel, run or fight. Eleanor whispered, "What now?" Her voice was both plea and warning. He clenched his fists, heart pounding as the prisoners poured into the corridor, chains dragging. Jonathan whispered, "Now we fight for breath, for freedom, for all who cannot." The weight of history bore down, pressing every choice into eternity. The night wind bit against their faces as Jonathan led Eleanor and Thomas into the abandoned mill on the outskirts of town. Eleanor whispered, "The soldiers will scour every corner, we cannot linger." Her fear clung to each word. Jonathan's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, his eyes scanning the shadows. He said, "This is no longer about escape, it is about what comes after." Thomas leaned against the rotting wall, smirking faintly. He murmured, "Freedom sounds noble, but death often answers quicker." The air carried the faint creak of the mill's broken wheel, its wooden arms groaning in the wind like a warning. Eleanor clasped her hands, her knuckles white, as she whispered, "If we fail, the world will forget us." Jonathan turned, his voice sharp yet steady. "Then we must not fail." Eleanor pressed closer to Jonathan, her voice trembling. "I cannot carry this weight, Jonathan. I am not meant for wars." He looked at her, his face lined with exhaustion. "None of us were meant for it, yet here we stand." Thomas stepped forward, eyes gleaming with a strange calm. "Do you not see, Jonathan? People will follow you if you dare to lead." Jonathan shook his head, fists tightening. "I am no leader, only a man who refuses chains." A gust of wind rattled the wooden boards, dust falling like ash. Eleanor said, "If you fall, we all fall with you." Silence stretched, broken only by the pounding of Jonathan's heart, as if history demanded a choice. The sound of distant horns shattered the fragile silence, warning of soldiers sweeping through the town. Jonathan whispered, "They are hunting us still." Eleanor's eyes widened and she gasped, "We must run before they find us here." Thomas placed a hand on Jonathan's shoulder, his voice low, "You cannot run forever. Tonight you must choose, hide or fight." Jonathan's jaw clenched as he turned toward the doorway, staring into the dark streets beyond. His chest burned with fear and resolve entwined. Eleanor whispered desperately, "If you fight, you will die." Jonathan's voice broke through her fear, "If I run, all of us die." The weight of the moment bound them, as though time itself paused in breathless anticipation. Eleanor collapsed onto a broken beam, her breath shuddering. She said, "We are shadows in a storm, Jonathan. No one will remember us." He crouched before her, his eyes fierce. "They will remember because we fought, not because we yielded." Thomas knelt beside them, his expression carefully masked. He said, "Hope is dangerous. It binds men tighter than chains." Jonathan's face hardened, his words sharp. "Hope is the only weapon they cannot take." Outside, the thud of soldiers' boots grew nearer, echoing through the hollow streets. Eleanor trembled, pressing her hands against her ears, whispering prayers she no longer believed. Jonathan rose, shoulders heavy but unbroken. He said, "We hold here, or history swallows us whole." The distant horns grew louder, joined by the clamor of steel and shouts. Jonathan stepped into the center of the mill, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "This is where it begins. No more running." Eleanor's breath hitched as she whispered, "If you fall, I cannot bear it." He turned to her, eyes burning. "If I fall, you must rise. That is the price of freedom." Thomas watched, silent, his lips curling into a faint, unreadable smile. The floor creaked beneath their weight as if the earth itself braced for what came next. Outside, firelight flickered against the night sky, soldiers drawing closer. Jonathan whispered, "The time for shadows is over. Now we stand." The church bells tolled at dawn, their mournful sound rolling across the smoldering town. Jonathan said, "They burn every house that dares whisper of freedom." His eyes scanned the smoking ruins, jaw clenched. Eleanor gripped his arm, whispering, "We cannot watch, we must act." Fear shimmered in her voice, yet her gaze held fierce resolve. Thomas narrowed his eyes, muttering, "The people bend because they fear the whip, not because they believe the lies." Children cried in the distance, their wails mixing with the crackle of collapsing timbers. Jonathan's fists tightened, rage rising like the smoke around him. He said, "If they burn our homes, then they kindle our fire." The weight of oppression pressed harder, forcing the choice between silence and rebellion. Jonathan stepped into the square, his voice low. "Look at them, starved by rulers who feast in gold halls." Eleanor's face paled as she whispered, "If they hear you, we are already dead." Thomas chuckled darkly, saying, "Dead men do not frighten tyrants, living rebels do." Around them, Villagers huddled, eyes hollow from hunger, whispers of revolt rippling like fragile sparks. A soldier strode past, whip coiled at his belt, his eyes sweeping with cold authority. Jonathan's breath hitched, every muscle tensed. He murmured, "They see us as cattle, but they will learn we are wolves." The air tightened with dread, every sound magnified. The crunch of boots, the wheeze of starving lungs, the silence of history waiting to break. A cry rang out as a soldier struck an old man to the ground. Eleanor gasped, covering her mouth as Jonathan surged forward. She whispered, "Do not, they will kill you." Jonathan froze, torn between rage and survival. Thomas leaned in, his voice laced with venom. "If you wait, his blood stains your silence." The crowd shifted, whispers swelling into anger, eyes turning to Jonathan. The old man groaned, his face pressed into the dirt, blood staining the stones. Jonathan trembled, his voice breaking. "How long must we bow before chains become bones?" The villagers stirred, hope flickering like a candle against the storm. The choice loomed. One strike could spark rebellion, or doom them all. Jonathan lunged forward, catching the soldier's arm before the whip fell again. Gasps erupted from the crowd as steel clattered on stone. Eleanor cried out, "Jonathan, no!" Her voice cracked with terror. Thomas grinned coldly, whispering, "So the wolf bares its teeth." The soldier's face twisted in fury as he shoved against Jonathan, but the crowd surged closer, murmurs swelling like a rising tide. Jonathan said through gritted teeth, "No more whips, no more chains." The soldier's eyes flicked nervously at the growing crowd. Eleanor's heart hammered as she clutched her shawl, whispering prayers under her breath. The world seemed to tilt, history poised on a single heartbeat. The square erupted in chaos as the villagers surged forward, shouting, throwing stones. Eleanor screamed, "They will slaughter us all." Jonathan pushed the soldier back, shouting, "Stand! Do not bend!" His voice cracked with fury and hope entwined. Thomas leaned close, whispering with dark satisfaction, "Now you lead, whether you wish it or not." The soldier stumbled, his whip falling to the ground. The villagers roared, their hunger turning into rage. Jonathan's breath burned as he shouted, "For every lash we give them fire." Eleanor clung to his arm, trembling, but her eyes lit with fierce resolve. The moment became unstoppable. Rebellion sparked in blood and ash. The rebels hid within the ruins of the old chapel, its broken stained glass casting shards of moonlight across the floor. Jonathan whispered, "This place reeks of ghosts, yet here we plan the future." Eleanor touched a fractured window, murmuring, "Every color once sang with hope, now it bleeds in silence." Thomas paced near the altar, voice calm but sharp, "Hope will not save us, strategy will." Jonathan turned to him, saying, "Strategy without heart is nothing but tyranny reborn." Outside, the howl of wind carried the faint clang of distant chains. Eleanor whispered, "The walls listen. If we are betrayed, even the stones will know." Jonathan clenched his fists, whispering, "Then let them hear courage, not fear." The sound of footsteps echoed down the chapel aisle. A cloaked figure emerged, face hidden in shadow. Jonathan raised his hand, whispering, "Who dares come here?" Eleanor stepped back, fear in her eyes. Thomas smirked faintly, muttering, "Perhaps salvation arrives in rags." The figure lowered the hood, revealing a woman with piercing eyes. She said, "I am not your enemy. I am the hand that shielded your family when soldiers came." Jonathan staggered, whispering, "You? Why risk all for me?" The woman's voice carried steady weight. "Because your name carries the blood of kings, whether you accept it or not." Eleanor gasped, her hand over her lips. The air thickened with the weight of revelation. "Wow." Jonathan's chest tightened, words choking in his throat. "Blood of kings," he muttered. Eleanor whispered, "All this time, you were more than farmer, more than soldier." Thomas's eyes gleamed with quiet calculation. He said, "Royal blood in chains, how poetic." The woman stepped closer, her voice sharp. Your bloodline is hunted because you are the rightful heir to a throne stolen by tyrants. Jonathan shook his head, whispering, I wanted no crown, only freedom. The woman replied, Freedom and crown are now the same. Your people will not rise for a farmer, but they will for their king. Silence thundered through the chapel, every breath heavy with destiny. Eleanor's voice cracked as she whispered, If this is true, every soldier will hunt you, Jonathan. He turned to her, eyes heavy with fear and resolve. I never asked for this crown, yet it weighs on me already. Thomas stepped closer, smirk fading into gravity. Then use it, or watch them crush us beneath it. The woman raised her hand, saying, The tyrants fear you because blood carries power. If you deny it, you deny the rebellion. Jonathan's breath caught, chains of destiny tightening. Eleanor clutched his sleeve, pleading, Do not let them break you. Jonathan whispered, They may break my body, but they will not break my vow. The chapel trembled with the rumble of distant drums. Eleanor gasped, whispering, They march already. Jonathan's jaw tightened as he turned to the woman. If they fear me, then I cannot hide. Thomas whispered, Finally, the crown weighs heavier than the chains. The woman nodded, her eyes unblinking. The rebellion must see you as their rightful leader, or it will die before dawn. Jonathan drew a breath sharp as a blade. Then let them see me, not as king, but as man who will bleed for them. Eleanor whispered, We are no longer shadows, we are storm. Outside, thunder rolled, as if history itself demanded battle. Rain lashed the ruins as Jonathan stumbled into the courtyard, his face pale beneath streaks of mud and blood. Eleanor cried, You cannot stand alone against shadows this heavy. Her voice trembled but carried desperate strength. Thomas stepped forward, smirk faint beneath dripping hair. Shadows weigh less than crowns, Jonathan. You carry both. Jonathan spat, his chest heaving. I carry freedom, not crowns. Villagers whispered from doorways, their eyes filled with fear and doubt. Eleanor gripped Jonathan's arm, pleading, If we fracture now, we are finished. Lightning split the sky as thunder rolled, the storm echoing the storm within. Jonathan whispered, Better to break in truth than kneel in lies. Jonathan leaned against the crumbling wall, blood trickling from his temple. Eleanor knelt beside him, whispering, Do not leave me in this storm. Her tears vanished into the rain. Thomas crossed his arms, his voice cold. He cannot lead if he cannot even stand. Jonathan groaned, forcing his body upright. I will stand until death itself cuts me down. Eleanor pressed her hands against his wound, whispering, You bleed for people who may never rise. Jonathan met her eyes, voice raw. I bleed because they must. Thomas sneered, muttering, And bleed you shall, until only chains remain. Thunder cracked, sealing his venom with the storm. Villagers crowded beneath dripping roofs, whispers sharp as knives. A woman cried, Someone betrayed us. How else did soldiers find us? Jonathan's eyes locked on Thomas, his voice rough. Was it you? Thomas smiled faintly, tilting his head. Perhaps survival demanded a price. Eleanor gasped, clutching Jonathan's sleeve, whispering, Say it is not true. Jonathan's fists shook, his voice cracked with fury. You sold trust like bread, and now it poisons us. Villagers' voices swelled with anger, some shouting, some weeping. Thomas shrugged, his words cutting cold. Betrayal is a word spoken by the losing side. The storm roared, as if bearing witness to treachery unveiled. Jonathan lunged forward, seizing Thomas by the collar, shouting, You betrayed us. Villagers gasped, their cries rising above the rain. Eleanor pulled at Jonathan's arm, sobbing, Do not let rage consume you. Thomas's voice remained calm, mocking. And yet, you breathe still because of me. Perhaps I gave you more time than you deserved. Jonathan's teeth clenched, voice low. You cloak treachery as sacrifice. Thomas sneered. Sacrifice means nothing if fools waste it. Eleanor's voice cracked. Do not let him steal your soul with lies. Rain poured harder, the world trembling with fury and sorrow alike. Jonathan released Thomas, voice heavy with despair. You were brother, but now only shadow. Thomas smirked, stepping back. Shadows endure longer than fire. Eleanor collapsed to her knees, whispering, We are undone. Jonathan lifted his chin, voice sharp despite breaking. We are not undone, we are betrayed. Villagers cried out, their anger bursting into storm-wet shouts. Torches sputtered, smoke rising with the rain. Jonathan's body sagged, but his spirit clawed upward. He said, Betrayal is the blade that cuts deeper than steel. Thomas vanished into the storm, leaving silence heavier than thunder. Rebellion cracked at its heart. The dawn bled red over the battlefield, smoke curling from the ruins of the village. Jonathan stood at the ridge, his coat torn, blood crusting his brow. Eleanor whispered, They come with fire and steel. Her voice trembled, but her gaze was unbroken. Jonathan's chest rose with sharp breath. Then we give them storm and stone. Villagers, gaunt yet fierce, gathered with makeshift weapons. Their whispers became chants, echoing through the hills. Eleanor clutched Jonathan's sleeve, murmuring, If you fall, hope dies. He turned to her, his eyes burning. Hope does not die with me, it lives in every hand that dares rise. The drums of war thundered from the horizon, shaking the earth. The tyrant's army marched forward, rows of soldiers armored in iron, their boots striking like thunder. Jonathan said, They believe fear is stronger than fire. His voice carried across the trembling ground. Eleanor whispered, And yet we are only shadows before them. Jonathan's jaw clenched, answering, Even shadows can blind in the right light. Villagers raised their weapons high, shouts tearing through the smoke. Eleanor's heart pounded, her face pale but her stance firm. Jonathan lifted a broken banner, its fabric ragged. We do not fight for crowns, we fight for breath. The army advanced, drums pounding, the clash of destiny closing in. The first clash shook the earth as steel met stone. Jonathan shouted, Stand! Hold the line! His voice broke against the roar of battle. Eleanor ducked behind him, swinging a torch, her fear burning into fury. Soldiers pushed forward, blades flashing in morning light. Jonathan's arm trembled as he blocked a strike, his eyes wild with fire. Eleanor cried out, Do not fall! Jonathan's voice thundered back, I rise for them, I rise for you. Blood sprayed, cries echoing, chaos tearing across the ridge. Villagers screamed, their hunger turning to rage. The world narrowed to fire, steel, and the beating of hearts refusing chains. Jonathan's blade shattered, leaving him weaponless. He staggered back as a soldier raised his sword high. Eleanor screamed, Jonathan! But before the strike fell, a villager hurled a stone, knocking the soldier aside. Jonathan gasped, gripping the villager's arm. Your courage is worth more than iron. The crowd roared, pushing forward, a tide of rage against steel. Eleanor's face burned with tears as she whispered, You lead them even when broken. Jonathan bellowed, Not lead, I stand beside them. The battlefield trembled as villagers surged, their chants drowning the drums. The tide shifted, fear breaking into defiance. The ridge burned with fire and blood, as Jonathan raised his voice above the storm. This is not the end, it is the beginning. Villagers shouted, surging as one, pushing soldiers back step by step. Eleanor's shawl whipped in the wind, her eyes ablaze with fierce devotion. Jonathan's chest heaved, his body battered but unbroken. He shouted, They cannot chain the breath of a free people. Soldiers faltered, fear creeping into their eyes. Eleanor whispered, They hear you, Jonathan. They believe. Jonathan stood amidst the fire, a man reborn in defiance, the storm of rebellion rising behind him. The battlefield lay in ruin, smoke curling into the pale morning sky. Jonathan stood amidst the dead, his chest heaving with grief. Eleanor whispered, We survived, but at what price? Her voice trembled with sorrow. Villagers searched through bodies, calling names that answered only with silence. Jonathan knelt beside a fallen fighter, closing his eyes with trembling hands. "They are not forgotten," he murmured. Eleanor pressed her palm to his shoulder, saying, "Your vow bound them to hope, and they gave their lives for it." Jonathan's eyes glistened as he whispered, "Hope demands blood. Freedom demands more." The wind carried ashes like a funeral hymn. Eleanor's eyes swept across the wounded gathered in the square. She whispered, "Every scar tells the story we carry." Jonathan answered, "Every story is written in blood." Villagers lit small fires, warming their shivering hands, faces hollow yet alive. Eleanor cradled a child, whispering prayers of comfort. Jonathan lifted his gaze, voice heavy. "We fought not for glory but for breath." A hush fell over the crowd, their eyes turning to him. Eleanor said, "They wait for your words, Jonathan." His chest burned with the weight of history, pressing forward. "I need you," he whispered. "If I fall silent, their sacrifice dies with me." Jonathan climbed onto the broken steps of the square, his voice carrying, "We bled, we burned, but we did not kneel." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as the villagers stirred, whispers swelling into murmurs of strength. Jonathan raised his hand, saying, "Freedom is not gift. It is demand, bought with our lives, kept by our courage." Eleanor whispered, "They believe you now." A roar rose from the crowd, fragile but fierce, like a storm rebuilding. Jonathan's heart trembled with both grief and pride. "Our dead stand with us still. Their breath lives in ours." The people shouted, their voices binding into one. As night fell, Jonathan walked among the graves dug into wet earth. Eleanor followed, her shawl clutched close. "Every name carved here is weight upon your heart," she whispered. Jonathan touched the rough wooden markers, whispering, "They gave all, while I remain." Eleanor's voice softened, "You remain to carry them." He stopped at a grave, kneeling. "I will not let their breath fade." The lantern flickered, shadows stretching long across the field. Eleanor said, "History remembers not the crown, but the vow kept." Jonathan's tears mixed with rain, silent promises binding his soul to the fallen. Smoke curled into the night as Jonathan stood at the edge of the battlefield, staring into endless dark. Eleanor whispered, "What now?" Her voice barely carried. Jonathan's breath shuddered as he answered, "Now we live the freedom they died for." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, whispering, "And if history forgets us?" Jonathan's gaze hardened. "History forgets kings, but never rebels who bled for truth." He turned, walking into the smoke, his figure fading like shadow into dawn's promise. Eleanor closed her eyes, whispering, "May the storm remember." Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of dying fire.